We are just an advanced breed of monkeys on a minor planet called the Earth. But we can understand the universe, and that makes us very special. Students, any guesses who said these words? Right. These are the words by great physicist and cosmologist Stephen Hawking, who was considered one of the greatest scientists. He was popular in the field of cosmology for his theories, in which he uses Einstein's relativity theory and quantum mechanics. Hawking had made an unimaginable contribution to the field of science. I'm Vijaya Joshi from D.E.S.Secondary School. Students, today we are going to learn 3.3 chapter Stephen Hawking, a very inspirational story. Stephen William Hawking, who was cosmologist, theoretical physicist, and author. Hawking was born in Oxford into a family of doctors. He was one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists. His work on the origins and structure of the universe, from the Big Bang to black holes, revolutionized the field of physics. Hawking was best known for work regarding black holes. His best-selling books have appealed to readers who may not have Hawking's scientific background. These are some of his popular books: The Grand Design, A Brief History of Time, My Brief History, Universe in a Nutshell, Black Holes and Baby Universe, A Briefer History of Time. The Theory of Everything is a 2014 biographical film directed by James Marsh, set at the University of Cambridge. It details the life of the theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking. It was a commercial success. Hawking also popular in a culture. Hawking also hosted the series Masters of Science Fiction. His synthesizer voice was used in the Pink Floyd song Keep Talking and in the Discovery Channel music video I Love the Planet. Let us begin with the lesson. Stephen Hawking, born on 8 January 1942. He is an English theoretical physicist, cosmologist, author, and director of research at the Center of Theoretical Cosmology within the Cambridge University. Hawking was the first to set out a theory of cosmology explained by a union of the general theory of relativity and quantum mechanics. Hawking is an honorary fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, FRCA. Hawking is an honorary fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, FRSA, a lifetime member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, and a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian award in the US. This lesson gives us an insight about the great scientist, his life, and his works. Physicist is a person who studies physics. Cosmology, it means the study of the nature and the origin of universe. And a person or someone who studies the nature and origin of nature or origin of universe is called as cosmologist. Stephen Hawking is a British scientist, professor, and author who has done groundbreaking work in physics and cosmology, and whose books have helped to make science accessible to everyone. At the age of 21, while studying cosmology at the University of Cambridge, he was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. Part of his life story was depicted in the 2014 film, The Theory of Everything. Hawking was born to the highly educated parents. Stephen's father, who was a biologist and medical researcher, wanted his son to become a doctor. But Stephen, who was also a gifted child, was only interested in physics and maths. In 1959, Hawking was accepted to the University College in Oxford, where he studied theoretical physics. And after receiving his bachelor's degree in 1962, he left for graduate work at Trinity Hall, Cambridge, to study cosmology. Over the years, Stephen Hawking has written or co-written a total of 15 books. A few of the most noteworthy include: in 1988, Hawking catapulted to international prominence with the publication of A Brief History of Time. The short, informative book became an account of cosmology for the masses and offered an overview of space and time, the existence of God and the future. The work was an instant success, spending more than 4 years atop the London Sunday Times bestseller list. Since its publication, it has sold millions of copies worldwide and been translated into more than 40 languages. Hawking, who had found more interest in cosmology and physics, was nicknamed as Einstein while in school. He had made some origin or innovative work in the field of physics and cosmology. He wrote many books that were easy to understand by common man. They were appreciated by masses. A Brief History of Time also wasn't as easy to understand as some had hoped. So, in 2001, Hawking followed up his book with The Universe in a Nutshell, which offered a more illustrated guide to cosmology's big theories. In 2005, Hawking authored even more accessible A Briefer History of Time, which further simplified the original work's core concepts and touched upon the newest developments in the field like string theory. A Brief History of Time, which was published in 1988, the non-fiction book, but bestseller. It explains the history of the universe, how it works, and what its eventual fate will be. It explains complex cosmology to people without a scientific background. In this book, Hawking discusses the forces that created the universe and the laws which govern it. The Universe in a Nutshell, which was published in 2001, is about a theoretical physics. It's an illustrated sequel that unravels or solves the mysteries of the earth. A Briefer History of Time, which was published in 2005, popular science book by Stephen Hawking and the American physicist Leonard Mlodinow. And in this book, the duo had discussed about quantum mechanics, the Big Bang theory, and other topics in a more accessible fashion to the general public. Together, these 3 books, along with Hawking's own research and papers, articulate the physicist's personal search for science's holy grail, a single unifying theory that can combine cosmology, the study of the big, with quantum mechanics, the study of the small, to explain how the universe began. It's this kind of ambitious thinking that has allowed Hawking, who claims he can think in 11 dimensions, to lay out some big possibilities for humankind. He's convinced that time travel is possible and that humans may indeed colonize other planets in the future. Hawking not only made science or physics and cosmology interesting, but also made it easy to understand to everyone. It also tells us that how curious and passionate he was about cosmology, how his research in the field of cosmology, it means the study of this nature in a very broader way, with the quantum mechanics, the study of the small, his research made us think from all dimensions and areas of cosmology. He worked for the betterment of humankind. He was convinced that time travel is possible and in the future, humans may or humans can establish their settlements or their colonies on other planets as well. Isn't it interesting to settle on some other planet? In September 2010, Hawking spoke against the idea that God could have created the universe in his book, The Grand Design. Hawking previously argued that belief in a creator could be compatible with modern scientific theories. His new work, however, concluded that the Big Bang was inevitable. Hawking previously argued that belief in a creator could be compatible with modern scientific theories. His new work, however, concluded that the Big Bang was the inevitable consequence of the laws of physics and nothing more. Because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Hawking said, spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing. Why the universe exists, why we exist. In his lifetime, Hawking was very much vocal for his Big Bang theory. The idea that universe began by exploding suddenly out of an ultra-tall singularity, smaller than an atom. In his life, Hawking was vocal for his Big Bang theory. The idea that universe began by exploding suddenly out of an ultra-dense singularity smaller than an atom. In his final book, Brief Answers to Big Questions, he explained the idea of God. Let's see what he had said in his own words. Hawking said, I think universe was spontaneously created out of nothing. According to the laws of science, if you accept, as I do, that the laws of nature are fixed, then it doesn't take long to ask what role is there for God. If you like, you can say the laws are the work of God, but that is more a definition of God than a proof of his existence. The Grand Design was Hawking's first major publication in almost a decade. Within his new work, Hawking set out to challenge Sir Isaac Newton's belief that the universe had to have been designed by God, simply because it could not have been born from chaos. It is not necessary to invoke God to light the blue touch paper and set the universe going, Hawking said. Yes, in his book, The Grand Design, he challenges belief in the divine creation of the universe. And according to him, the laws of physics and not the will of God provide the real explanation as to how life on earth came into being. There is a law such as gravity. The universe can and universe will create itself from nothing. His book, The Grand Design, answers the questions like why the universe exists, why we exist. It is not necessary to request or to help God or to take a help from God to light the blue touch paper and set universe going. At the age of 21, Stephen Hawking was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. In a very simple sense, the nerves that controlled his muscles were shutting down. At the time, doctors gave him 2.5 years to live. During his days in Cambridge, after his 21st birthday, he was diagnosed with ALS. He had noticed that he gradually losing control over his muscles. Sometimes he had lost his balance while walking or running. He was unable to hold the pen and write. Then later, his speech also became slur or unclear. Even at this stage, Hawking did not take his condition seriously. Doctors did not expect him to survive for long. their verdict being complete paralysis and death within 2 years. But surprisingly, his illness stopped progressing rapidly after he had met Jane, who later became his wife. Hawking first began to notice problems with his physical health while he was at Oxford. On occasion, he would trip and fall or slur his speech. He didn't look into the problem until 1963, during his first year at Cambridge. For the most part, Hawking had kept these symptoms to himself, but when his father took notice of the condition, he took Hawking to see a doctor. For the next 2 weeks, the 21-year-old college student made his home at a medical clinic, where he underwent a series of tests. Later, when Hawking had visited his house during the winter season, his father noticed his condition and took him to the doctor. And for the next 2 weeks, Hawking was in a medical clinic and underwent a series of tests. They took a muscle sample from my arm, stuck electrodes into me, and injected some radio-opaque fluid into my spine, and watched it going up and down with x-rays as they tilted the bed. He once said, "After all that, they didn't tell me what I had except that it was not multiple sclerosis and that I was an atypical case." Doctor took muscle sample from his arm, stuck the electrodes, it means a very tiny wires that are applied to the body for ECG measurement, injected radio-opaque fluid into his spine so that they can diagnose the exact problem. And after all these tests, doctor didn't tell Hawking what had happened to him. Only one thing he came to know, that he was suffering from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is a motor neuron disease. Eventually, however, doctor did diagnose Hawking with the early stages of ALS. It was devastating news for him and his family. But a few events prevented him from becoming completely despondent. The first of these came while Hawking was still in the hospital. There, he shared a room with a boy suffering from leukemia. Relative to what his roommate was going through, Hawking later reflected, his situation seemed more tolerable. Not long after he was released from the hospital, Hawking had a dream that he was going to be executed. He said this dream made him realize that there were still things to do with his life. The news of his disease was devastating for the family, but few events of his life prevented him from becoming completely unhappy. Hawking did not lose his hope, and one of the incident was his roommate in the hospital who was suffering from leukemia, that is a cancer of blood cells. Hawking had seen his suffering and thought that his own condition is more tolerable. And when he was discharged from the hospital, he came with a positive mindset. He thought that still he can achieve his dream. Still, there are many more things he can do in his life. In a sense, Hawking's disease helped him become the noted scientist he is today. Before the diagnosis, Hawking hadn't always focused on his studies. Before my condition was diagnosed, I had been very bored with life, he said. There had not seemed to be anything worth doing. With the sudden realization that he might not even live long enough to earn his PhD, Hawking poured himself into his work and research. Doctor told Hawking that he will not survive for long, at the max 2 to 5 years. But on the other hand, Hawking was positive. He was more positive about completing his PhD, his research, and when he realized that he might not even live long to earn his PhD, he worked hard, he poured himself into his research. As physical control over his body diminished, he had to be forced to use a wheelchair by 1969. The effects of his disease started to slow down. Over time, however, Hawking's ever-expanding career was accompanied by an ever-worsening physical state. By the mid-1970s, the Hawking family had taken in one of the Hawking's graduate students to help manage his care and work. He could still feed himself and get out of bed, but virtually everything else required assistance. In addition, his speech had become increasingly slurred. So that only those who knew him well could understand him. In 1985, he lost his voice for good, following a tracheotomy. The resulting situation required 24-hour nursing care for the acclaimed physicist. Over the period of time, he lost control over his body and forced to use a wheelchair by 1969. In 1970s, his graduate students helped him because he needed round-the-clock nursing. And in addition, his speech became slurred, unclear. Only people who knew him very well could understand what he was speaking. In 1985, he lost his voice permanently. He lost his voice for good. It means he lost his voice for permanently, following a tracheotomy. And due to this, he required 24 hours nursing. It also put in peril Hawking's ability to do his work. The predicament caught the attention of a California computer programmer who had developed a speaking program that could be directed by a head or eye movement. The invention allowed Hawking to select words on a computer screen that were then passed through a speech synthesizer. At the time of its introduction, Hawking, who still had use of his fingers, selected his words with a handheld clicker. Today, with virtually all control of his body gone, Hawking directs the program through a cheek muscle attached to a sensor. As we know that his physical condition and the problems worsened day by day, he was unable to do his work. A computer programmer from California helped him, and he developed a speaking program that could be directed by head or eye movement. And this invention helped Hawking to select the words to communicate with the world. Through the program and the help of assistants, Stephen Hawking has continued to write at a prolific rate. His work has included numerous scientific papers, of course, but also information for the non-scientific community. Hawking's health, of course, remains a constant concern, a worry that was heightened in 2009 when he failed to appear at a conference in Arizona because of a chest infection. In April, Hawking, who had already announced he was retiring after 30 years from the post of Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at Cambridge, was rushed to the hospital for being what university officials described as gravely ill. It was later announced that he was expected to make a full recovery. Even though there was a programmer, he was speaking with the help of that California programmer with the world, his physical condition worsened day by day. But still he continued to write at a prolific rate, abundantly, plenty, and his work has included numerous scientific papers, also for the scientist and also information for the non-scientific community. This brilliant physicist, Stephen Hawking, passed away on 14th March 2018 at the age of 76 in Cambridge, England. Hawking's intellect and zest for life inspired the world to be curious. Intelligence is the ability to adapt the change. These are the words said by Stephen Hawking at the Oxford University graduation. Thank you.